Hello and welcome to the stone cutting and lettering takeaway.
Do you mean the stone carving and lettering takeaway?
Stone carving and lettering takeaway podcast. Something like 19 episodes in, and I still don't get the name right.
We're so good at this.
My name's Nida Bilby. I am a freelance stone carver.
And I am Charlotte Howarth, and I'm a freelance letter carver.
And here we are, Charlotte, creeping into December. This is our Christmas edition, and Boise, do we have an edition for you.
This is our Christmas present to the carving community.
This is our present to the carving community. How wonderful is that? We are being so extraordinarily generous. We're going to share our fabulous experience with you, and I don't think you'll be disappointed. There will not be any disappointment at this present.
So we have the most wonderful interview with Richard Kindersley.
Oh my God, it was so... Anyway, I'm not going to preempt it. Listen to this. Quietly digest the wisdom of somebody who is unprecedented and, unrepeatable. This man is extraordinary. So,
Listen.
Charlotte.
Listen and enjoy.
Listen and enjoy.
So today we are extremely fortunate to have Richard Kindersley in our interview room. So Richard, welcome. It's a real pleasure to have you here. Thank you.
It's I feel like we've got royalty on the line, Richard. You are, to some, you are the absolute pinnacle of the craft. So I'm really, really honoured to be able to talk to you and to have you on the podcast.
We've got a list of questions which we'll kick off with in a minute. I trained with you for 2 years in 1992 to 1994. So it was quite a long time ago. Anyway.
Do you have any, what's your, I'm going to kick off in a slightly, you know what I'm going to ask. Richard, what was Charlotte like as a person in your workshop? Do you have any memories of her at all? Do you even remember her being there?
I have lots of memories of her. She was, and no doubt still is, a very strong character. And there's two things I remember. One is she literally saved my life, 80 feet up on the scaffolding, where we've been working on some large lettering, and I wanted to photograph it. And I stood back on the scaffolding, and I needed to move further back. And then, there's a gap in the scaffolding for the ladder.
Yes.
And unknown to me, I was walking back towards that.
Oh, my God.
And I was just about to step off into space when Charlotte grabbed me. Do you remember that, Charlotte?
No, but if I had, I might have had a bigger claim on you.
Didn't Gaudi die? Isn't the urban myth that Gaudi stepped back to admire something, got hit by a tram? Or horse and cart?
Yes, I don't know.
That could have gone down in absolute history. You and Gaudi. How about that, Richard?
I just think I'm going to call that the podcast title, Charlotte Howarth Saves Richard Kindersley's Life.
Bloody hell. And actually, I know how strong Charlotte is, so she probably literally picked you off the floor and put you back on the scaffolding.
She did, but my other enduring memory about Charlotte, and we worked on several larger building sites, is the way she would come onto a building site and literally dominate. And have all these builders sort of scuttering around, getting a bits of scaffolding pole and doing this and that for her. She was an amazingly strong character.
Yes, she can definitely organise.
Yes,
very strong organizer. So she's no one can see her right now, but she's smiling with she knows. Would you recognise those things in you, Charlotte? Would you recognise those?
I think I'm incredibly self-unaware, so I don't always recognise the things.
Obviously, you save lives being bossy, Charlotte, so there you go. I think we should talk about Richard now. Let's talk about Richard.
Me too. So our first question, Richard, is that most people know that your father is David Kindersley. And what was it like growing up around with your father's workshop, and how did you get interested, or did you ever think about doing anything else?
Well, I had a very sort of interesting and unusual childhood. First of all, my father didn't believe in schools. He had this romantic idea, which I still really believe in, that you should educate your children with your friends, because it is through your friends that you make contact with the world. And all your values are shared with your friends. So if you bring your children up with your friends' children, there's that sharing of ideas, and particularly in our sort of modern world, ideas of morality, what is right and wrong. So we had a very disparate childhood in terms of education. We were partly home educated. We were partly educated by some teachers who came to stay with us in a caravan in our garden, and they had two children, so we all came together in a sort of homeschooling setup. And then by the time I was about 12, 13, and my brother was just 2 years younger, my father went through a very difficult and protracted divorce. So suddenly, out of the blue, Peter and I were sent off to boarding school. And imagine the sort of culture shock of that, from a very free, home-educated setup with a whole different set of values, to a boarding school with everything was very strict and organized. I remember Peter and I, the first shock was we had a number, and I still remember I was 84 and Peter was 83, and that sort of
dehumanization,
of oneself. It's like being in the army, I guess.
So you weren't known by Mr. Kindersley, you were known by 84.
Well, yes.
It's very Orwellian. It's like a George Orwell novel, isn't it? Child number 84.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
But of course, when you're a child, you think it's odd, but you don't think it's, evil or essentially sort of out of context with life. You just accept it. Well, that's what happens at school.
Mm.
And how did you do at school? Were you academic or did you struggle?
I struggled a bit. Subjects I really enjoyed, like geography, because I really like that sort of map and drawing maps, and odd things, like I became very interested in coal fields. So I did these maps of all the coal fields in the UK. I used to enjoy sports.
That's often quite lucky at boarding school. If you like sports at boarding school, that can often allow you some status in a sense, can't it? It can be belonging to a team.
Yes,
is often quite good.
Yes, and then later on we went to the Norwich Cathedral Choir School, and that has given me an endearing sort of love of ecclesiastical music, because we used to on Sunday go and hear the school choir practice, and that had a sort of lasting.
Did you leave school at
impression on me.
18 or?
I left school at 17, and then I went to Cambridge. I first of all went to the technical college, and then I went on to the art school and did painting, which I wasn't very good at, but I did sculpture with a local sculptor called John Smith, who was quite a sort of star in Cambridge, and he was very influential. He was a great man for improvising. He'd built a furnace in his garden, which I used to go out and help him melt bronze. It consisted of a hole in the ground and a vacuum cleaner.
Brilliant. So you were at college. Were you at art college for 3? Did you do 3 years, or was it a foundation, or? Right.
It was a foundation, and then I left and joined my father.
Was your brother? So you and your brother, had your brother gone to your father as well, or was he completely uninterested in anything like that?
No, he went to art school. He went to Hastings, took his degree, and then went into publishing.
Ah, okay. Still with type, still with words.
Absolutely,
in a different way, influenced with words in a different way.
Yes, and particularly illustrations. He was really sort of innovative in book design.
How long did you work with your dad for? What was that like?
It must have been about 6 years, 5 years. It was wonderful. I still remember the very first day we started work together. I went into his office where he had an enormous drawing board, and it was always covered with protective paper. And I remember him starting to draw letters, which was just a lovely experience, because as he drew them, he spoke about analogies of structure. Like he'd say when he drew the letter R, that the tail had to structurally support the bowl, otherwise it would fall over, and how that leg needed to be strong enough to support the sort of weight of the bowl. So all this sort of insight into individual letters as structures, as sort of dynamic entities, was absolutely fascinating for me anyway.
It's sort of to allow you to understand them in real space, even though that they have to occupy space as well as be on the paper, that they have an integral weight and mass, even though they were two-dimensional things.
Yes.
Do you think that as his apprentice, were you treated differently to other? You must have had other apprentices there too.
Yes.
Were you were just number 84 in the workshop, or you treat? I wondered whether he was slightly harder on you, or was he just the same with everyone?
No, he was very, very even-handed, and that goes right back to our childhood as well.
And who else was in the workshop when you were there?
There was Kevin Cribb, David Parsley, David Holgate. Do you know that?
So David Parsley trained my stepfather, David Baker. That's who David trained with. Yeah.
Oh, how interesting! I never knew that.
Yeah. So David Holgate, David Parsley, Kevin Cribb.
Yeah, I think for most of the time that was it. Ralph Byer was there occasionally.
Oh, okay.
And that's another story.
So you were there 6 years, and then did your father suggest you go out on your own, or did you say, Dad, I've had enough, I'm going to move to London and I'm going to start up on my own? And how did that transition work?
The latter. My father became more and more interested in letter spacing, and he was developing this electronic gadget which would sort of measure the weight either side of a letter to find its optical center, and then from that it could be spaced.
Wow!
And he became completely obsessed with that. I was involved more on the electronic side because I'd always been fascinated with electronics, and I'd built radios and crystal sets and things as a child. So when my father started to develop this electronic machine for measuring letter spacing, I helped him with that, which I loved. But it went on, for 2 or 3 years, and after that, my father became even more obsessed, and I became less interested. And I thought it was time to go. So I moved out of his workshop. I started up on my own. I started like everybody else does, literally on the kitchen table. I had an easel in the kitchen, propped against the wall, and I remained in Cambridge for about 2 years, and then I moved to London, as so many people do and have and will do, as being a great centre for work and contact.
And did you have, because like anybody, when you move away from the center of your, you build relationships with clients and they come to you and blah, blah, blah. How did you go about that at the beginning? Was it word of mouth? Was it one person saw one that led to the next, that led to the next? Or did you get a relationship with an architect, or how did that work?
Yes, good question. I wrote to a few architects I knew who were interested in buildings which potentially would have lettering. I also visited architects and spoke to them. It's very, very difficult when you first start because you've got no interface to work from.
Yeah.
So it depends very much on your sort of enthusiasm and personality, which is the first thing they sort of pick up on, because we're in a busy architect's office. Yeah. They're inundated with people coming to see them, trying to sell them stuff, from bricks to concrete to whatever, So you're just part of that sort of queue on the outside office. So it's difficult to break in, and when you do break in, you just have to be enthusiastic about what you do. It's really important to sort of know what you're talking about as well, because that will really, click with clients, because it'll be a real sort of intellectual way into your work.
It's interesting, isn't it? You often find people at the very beginning cannot value the intellectual connection to the object. They're obsessed with the practical skills.
Yes.
And sometimes the intellectual engagement comes second, and it's very hard sometimes to convince somebody that it's equal. You have to know what you're talking about, don't you? You have to find a way to verbalize in an intelligent way.
Yes.
The intent, the context, the making process, all of that. So that's really, I love the fact that you've mentioned that, because I do struggle conveying that to people at the beginning of their career. It's interesting.
I struggle with that. I'm very practical driven.
When I have students round now, they often get a grant. And what I do is to reinvest that grant money in buying them books on lettering and architecture, because I try and sort of encourage them to have a sort of depth behind their work of understanding architecture, understanding where our letters have.
What books do you get, Richard?
Oh, I've got a great sort of list, but I mean they vary from the huge tome by Morrison, the famous typographer, to Father Cattish, Reynolds Stone. I mean, the great thing is to have variety of people you can admire, because nobody has the complete answer, but everybody has part of the answer.
That's great.
Yeah. I remember picking up my first copy of Bannister Fletcher, the complete a treatise on architecture.
Oh, yes.
And opening it up and seeing that tree. He has this beautifully illustrated tree at the beginning with all the branches, with all of the branches of architecture leading all the way up to, I think, modernism.
Yes.
And I just remember thinking, everyone needs to own this. If they're going to work in any form of architecture or enrichment. Yeah. And I always say, because you can pick them up quite cheaply now, but it's such a beautifully illustrated book too. So it's words and images that can engage. It's just brilliant. So you were at home. At what point did you and your family think, right, this is it, I'm going to get a workshop? And really, it took off. Did it take a couple of years at home, or did it happen quite quickly?
It was a slow progress. I was very lucky. I got one or two quite larger commissions early on. There was a huge rebuilding of law courts, so I was quite involved in that. And I mean, not just designing coats of arms, architectural ones to go on the outside of buildings, but smaller ones inside, and of course the title lettering on these new courts. That in itself was a very good apprenticeship, because one had to deal with all sorts of different people, and I had my fair share of rows, with the Home Office and architects and people, because when you're young, the dreadful defining thing about being in your early 20s is your sheer appalling, unstoppable arrogance. And I had that bucketfuls, because I thought that I knew about heraldry. I knew about how to put heraldry on buildings, because I knew about concrete. I knew about brickwork. So no, I was very, very confident with my skills. So I had some wonderful sort of run-ins with architects and the Home Office.
Brilliant. Well, you just dug your heels in. You were like, no, you're wrong.
Yeah, I did. I mean,
Brilliant.
the first large commission was for Ipswich Crown Court, and I designed the coat of arms on the outside and the lettering, which was all carved into granite. And then I did the interior coats of arms, and the resident judge said to the architects, "I'm never going to sit in that courtroom while that coat of arms is up there."
That monstrosity. I'm not going to look at that.
Yeah.
What did he object to then? The literal style of it, the fashion of it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was completely way out. I mean, when I go back and look at it, I think to myself, God, how on earth did I do that? But as I said earlier, it was just the sheer arrogance of being a young man, wanting to make a statement, wanting to make things different.
Yeah.
As we all know from students and our own backgrounds, that when you're young, you want to be different. You want to change the world. And the difficulty is you haven't always got the experience. You look through a very narrow channel. I mean, coats of arms is an interesting thing, because all I looked at was the redesigning of the Royal Arms, with the lion and the unicorn, and interpret it in a new way. But what you forget about is that these are also emblems of the court and the sort of power of justice. So you have very narrow sort of tramlines in approaching your work, and a maturity in your work is all about seeing it in a broader context. It's not compromise, but it's being sort of fairer with the outside world.
The wider context of the piece.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it really, really is. When you started your own workshop and you became established, did you consciously say, this is the type of work? You must have been offered all kinds of work. Did you say to yourself, this is what I want my workshop to be known as? Did you look back at your father's studio and say, this is how I want to run it? Or as a young man, did you think, I'm doing this differently? I'm going to concentrate on this or that? What was the ethos when you started and you started to have people work for you? Was it organic, or was it a little bit planned of where you wanted this to go, your career, your absolute career?
Okay, well, the first thing I would say is I've always been interested in materials, interested in concrete, in steel, ceramic, of course, stone and slate. And I saw my work as a probe in exploring these materials. So I was always saying to architects, your building's built out of concrete, let's have concrete lettering, or your building's built out of brick, let's have a brick carving. So so materials and exploring the way you could apply lettering to materials was I think my main driving force. I get really excited about a new building, built out of the latest material. You see very much in our sort of work, the sort of fashions of architecture. I remember, the 10 years of brutalism in architecture, where everything was these great sort of concrete buildings, and my work reflected that at the time. So much of my commissions were in concrete, and then brick came along, and everything was built out of brick. Although it was false brickwork, it was just brick cladding. But I did a lot of brick carving, relief work as well as lettering.
So when you're designing something for a brutalist concrete building, you're thinking of design and font and legibility, etc. Did you think this is a time to develop a new font? I'm not a letterer, I'm going to use clumsy language. But did you think I'm going to redesign the alphabet so that's going to sit beautifully in bold? Or did you have a whole library of alphabets that you could apply this looks best? Or were you kind of excited by the idea of redesigning text for it? Same with brick. I imagine you can't put the same type of letters on a brick building than you can on a ceramic, or even a terracotta on a ceramic clad. Must be completely different. Is that I'm being naive, or is that the case?
No, you're spot on, because one of the real excitements is being given a palette of, say, concrete or brick or timber or whatever the building's made from, and then using that palette to make the letters. And that palette will influence the way the letters are made, how they're designed, their weight and legibility. So there's a wonderful sort of marriage of your basic ingredients, which is first and foremost the building and what the building is made from. And then following on from that, how that building or that material will react to you intervening and putting lettering onto it or making lettering out of the building itself. So all those variables I found fascinating.
And do you have do you cycle, Richard? Have I got that wrong? Did you used to cycle around London? I've got a feeling I've seen you.
A little bit,
not so much anymore.
No.
If you're running around London or the UK, let's face it, or Europe, and have you got a favourite that you look back on with great fondness? Is there a particular one of that period that you look back on and you think, yeah, I nailed that one?
I've got good memories of all the work I've done. It's very mixed, but to try and pick out a favourite would be difficult. I think sort of near the top certainly would be a very large coat of arms I did for Liverpool Crown Court, because it was innovative, made out of concrete. That's one. I guess that the much more recent work I've done for the Normandy landing, which was a huge sort of 2-year project. Yeah, I mean, all my work has been rewarding, which I'm eternally grateful for.
It's funny, isn't it? Because sometimes when people say, it was a clumsy question actually, but sometimes you look at something with great fondness, but it's not necessarily the most monumental. It's not the most beautifully made, but yeah, you can have a great fondness for the process and the time and the people that you worked with and all of those things. You've got all of those memories, haven't you, that can give
Absolutely.
a warmness to a project.
Yeah.
Charlotte, you've got there's some questions on the page, haven't there, that
I was going to ask about your influences. I mean, we've sort of touched on some already, but obviously you like a range, the obviously influenced and excited by different materials, and your father and the sculptor, but just and the music, but what other influences you might like to let us know?
I think the main one has been to do with the physicality of material, to take, and they're like people, but in exaggerated forms. We all know people through their personality, the way they walk, the way they talk. And it's the same with materials. You take steel or concrete or ceramics or brick. They're all very different, and they have their different personalities. So that interface between what you want to do with that material, what you want it to do for you. You have it is to follow the analogy of people. As an artist, you have to have a conversation with the material.
It's quite a risk sometimes when you first work with materials. I mean, when you're doing big commissions and the first time you're working in those materials on that scale, if I was to think about me doing something, there's big risks involved, and it takes great courage to push forward into those new areas. How did you feel that, or do you still feel that? Do you ever get nerves about doing things like that?
I mean, fear is a very interesting human experience because it's frightening but also stimulating.
Yeah.
And I think to be given a really big project and do something completely different in material is scary. But you just have to do your homework, do lots of tests beforehand, and always appear completely confident with your client, because they will be sort of worrying in the background, but you need to be absolutely sure about what you're doing.
It comes
all that sort of psychology of managing is in itself interesting and stimulating.
It comes back to what you were talking about. Do your homework, be interested in the intellectual conversation, and then when you talk about it, you immediately will become animated because you're sure about what you're saying, and the client absorbs all of that, which can then dissipate some of that fear in your mind, can't it?
Absolutely.
You can convince someone.
Yes, yeah, completely.
Would you say that, I'm interested to know how you see the trade of lettering, the craft and the trade of lettering today? I know there's a vast difference to when you started. I know that both materials and technology in particular, and the training and the numbers of people doing it, I imagine, must be quite different. What would you say the major struggles are now of the industry in comparison to when you started? Are they very different, or are they just the same? Get a client, do the work, deliver the work. Is it the same, or do you think there's far more pressure or less pressure?
It's very different in a number of aspects. The one which I notice most, and I find very interesting, is the fact that when I first started in the sort of craft of letter cutting, and I'm talking about the sort of higher end, there were no women at all, absolutely none. And now, of course, it's 50-50 with men. And what is interesting is that it's not just a question of women being able to express themselves and take up letter carving, but they've brought to letter carving something different. And I think that's a wonderful sort of addition to the craft. The other thing which my father always taught me, that quality will generate work, and he gave the often repeated story that if you go into a graveyard and there's one headstone there produced by a very competent letter cutter, it stands out and shines amongst all the sort of granite memorials. And people will come in and say, I like that. I'm not quite sure why, but I like the simplicity and directness of it. I want one of those for my father when he dies. So you can take to churchyards which start with one handcrafted memorial. You go back there 20 years later, and there are dozens. It's so important for all of us to sort of set these standards. And if we do that, the work will follow.
Do you think we innately recognize skill? I mean, you can be somebody who's never looked at a headstone before, but do you think the average person can walk in and recognize the innate craftsmanship behind something without being informed of it beforehand?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's the real joy of craft, and it's not just lettering. I mean, I've been to many unveilings of my work, and people haven't been able to articulate like we can about letter forms, but they just think the overall feel of it is beautiful.
That's extraordinary as a mammal on this planet that we have that in our DNA. I think that is a wonderful, positive human interaction with the world, isn't it?
Yeah.
In a world where the human interaction can often be devastating, the fact that if we all acknowledge the fact that we can see and understand beauty without being told about it, I think it's such a wonderful thing.
Brings me to a question I meant to put somewhere on the list. I thought you'd have a really good answer for this. So quite often when you apply for grants or, people ask you to justify your work, like why is letter carving important? Why is sculpture important? I find those questions impossible to answer out loud. And I think that, some people think, oh, yeah, it's easy, but I was going to ask you what your answer to that question would be. Because I think as makers, we're in a world of where there's increasing manufacture and cost cutting seems to be so essential. Often the niceties that, we're perceived to be are sometimes the first to go in a project because the value of it isn't understood. What do you think is the value? I know it's a question.
Well, what a lovely question. I always remember going to London Zoo to look at barn owls because I had a commission where I had to carve in relief some owls, and I remember going to the owl department of Regent's Park Zoo and seeing these great cages with these sort of bars across them on which these owls stood. And you know the old story about owls being wise. Well, I stood outside the cage and looked at these owls, and they had these huge circular eyes, and they just stood and stared. And at first you think, God, these are intelligent creatures. And you keep looking, and it slowly, step by step, dawns on you that in terms of human interaction, there is nothing there, nothing. So I think we, as a species, have this unique ability to be conscious, to be aware, to be self-aware. And I think that's what we need to put into our work. Because when you see a beautiful piece of pottery, something like, Lucy Ree, when you pick it up and you feel the form and shape, something comes back to you. And it's not just this is a beautiful piece of ceramics, but there's some energy that's been put in there. And I think that's really what our work should be about, is passing that on. I used to take students to Rome to show them the inscriptions there, and we used to go up the Via Appia, one of the one of the big sort of ancient streets out of Rome, and it's littered with lumps of stone on either side with lovely carved letters. And there's one stone which has a letter D on it, the most beautifully carved D, which I photographed and actually made in my studio. And I showed this to lettering students and clients, and they all say, "Isn't that beautiful?" And you ask them why, and these are people who don't understand about alphabets and drawing and carving, but they just see an object there which radiates beauty. So again, I think that's what we should be involved in.
Gosh.
I'm talking at a very high level, and all we can be as humble craftspeople is to aim there, not necessarily get there.
So can I ask you about the Norman, because I know it's dominated the last few years. I imagine it must have dominated. I'm not sure when it was completed, but I'm fascinated to know about that extraordinary project because it was so large and such an all-immersive project. Could you just talk us through that, Richard? Because I was stunned by it, to be honest.
Yes, I mean it was absolutely huge. and on all sorts of levels. I guess the first thing you have to address, and it certainly started to sort of permeate slowly through what we were doing, was just the sheer appalling loss of life. 217,000 men lost their lives. When you think all of them had mothers, fathers, brothers, so the sheer emotional impact of that landing must have been enormous, and the sheer sort of brutality of it. So in some ways, one felt this slightly sort of awkward guilt about being in a very cozy, warm building, designing something which was to commemorate them. I don't know, there were lots of confusing sort of emotions which went through, I think everybody who was involved on it. We had a relatively small team. It started off with me and Robbie Smith doing all the initial design work. There was a lot of computer work as well, designing typefaces. The other thing was the fear always of making a spelling mistake with that huge number of names.
Yeah.
I mean, just the sheer plodding through of all that work was just incredibly time consuming and laborious. And the trouble with repetitive work, you can become lazy and miss things. And we had to always sort of keep ourselves wide awake to make sure we didn't do that. And we had in place all sorts of checks to make sure no sort of silly spelling mistakes got through. But even now, I mean, to this day, there are 25 people who've come forward to say, that they lost their father or uncle, and they're not on the
Oh my God.
memorial, so that they had to be added in.
Oh my God.
Wow.
I was going to say, how on earth did you come up with a definitive list? And presumably there is no definitive list. It will be, while there is living memory, just those names will keep coming forward, no doubt.
Yes, I mean they so many bodies, but bodies weren't identified. So,
Yeah.
so checking by the war office was difficult. But yeah, we worked with a very good architect, somebody called Liam O'Connor, who was very keen on craft. And also in the building, he hated cladding. He wanted all his stones structures to be built out of block.
Where did the stone come from, Richard?
It was planned to come from France, and we had a quarry lined up who the quarry sent over to us a salesman, a French chap who had impeccable English, was very charming, and he said the quarry had millions of tons of perfect stone and nothing to worry about, and they could deliver on time because the schedule was incredibly tight. And when the first stones arrived, and as you two will know only too well, that when a piece of stone comes out of a quarry, you have to trust the quarryman because there's not much you can see. It's just a great boulder covered in mud. So when the stone got back to the UK and we started to saw it up, it was appalling. It was just completely useless. And we had this sort of train already in place of stone coming out of the quarry, going onto lorries, coming across to the UK, starting to flow, and the stone was just no good at all. So we had to very quickly negotiate with a new quarry, who again assured us that the stone was good, and this time the architects in particular were very, very careful about making sure the stone was good, and we have proceeded on that way. The logistics were unbelievable. The main stone contractor was a company in Northern Ireland. So the stone was quarried in France, which seems a natural place for it to come from, because the war was going to be there. So it came from France, across to the UK mainland, right up the centre of England to the ferry in Scotland, and then across to Northern Ireland, where it was worked, sawn up, and then driven all the way back to France, and then assembled on the building. So us, as people involved in the letter cutting, had to intervene wherever the stone was. So we worked for quite a long time in Northern Ireland, where the stone was coming off the saws, and we could do it. And finally, in the last sort of 6 months of the job, we worked in France.
Wow.
So,
Whereabouts in Northern Ireland were you?
it was right up in the north on the west coast, tiny little place. But
Can I ask the obvious question? I'm sure some of the listeners will want to know, why wasn't it processed in France?
It's all to do with the economics. This company in Northern Ireland were incredibly well equipped for doing very large jobs, and they had really sort of monopolized the whole sort of European sort of stone construction industry. I mean, they were very, very good, very careful, very efficient.
Was it before Brexit?
No,
After
afterwards.
Brexit.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. So you had to import it after Brexit, get it through England, then out again at the other side.
Into Northern Ireland.
The paperwork must have been extraordinary.
It was.
Unbelievable.
And also sort of other sort of dreadful things happened. It was also during COVID, or the beginning of COVID, and so technically we couldn't work in France because all travel was banned.
Yeah, French had very strict laws, didn't it, through COVID?
And we got permission from the French government to go across and work on this. And one of my assistants was flying back to site, and he got off the plane at Charles de Gaulle airport and produced the document from the French embassy. And the chap at the desk, very sort of low-level chap, said, I've never seen one of these before," and assumed that this assistant of mine was trying to get in illegally. So he was locked up in a cell overnight.
No. He thought he was trying to just get into the country legally.
Yeah. And so we had sort of all night sort of phone calls from the French embassy to the British embassy, and eventually he was let out. He was given a breakfast in his cell. He always tells me this, of a glass of water and a piece of stale bread. But for a young 21-year-old, it's pretty scary.
I bet it was scary as hell. Yeah. Oh my God. Can I ask a question? Did he ring? He didn't ring you. Who did?
Yeah.
He rang you in the middle of the night, just said, I'm in prison.
Yeah, he rang. We had a blow-by-blow account.
Oh my God. Well, that adds to the
come and work for Richard.
The mythical story behind it. Yeah, come and Richard. He'll get you locked up. And you answer the phone. I think that's the first thing. You'd be like, oh, what's he want now? Let it go to answer the phone. He'll sort it out. Whatever he's doing, he's a capable boy.
Yes, I won't forget that for a long time.
Can I ask what you're doing now? Are you working on? Have you got things in the pipeline? What are you up to?
I'm still doing odd bits and pieces. I'm really focusing on teaching. So I've got two students coming in. One man, one woman, which is nice. That's got a mix there. They're both very talented, so they're absolutely joy to teach. So that's taking up 2 days a week. I'm doing a bit of drawing, but it's all very sort of low key.
You've probably trained more people than anybody else, Richard.
Yeah.
You know, your workshop has been so prolific, not just in terms of the output of commissions, but the number of people who have come through your workshop and gone on to have workshops and successful workshops of their own. I mean, it's just incredible. You know, I don't think there's anybody else that's had such a big impact in training and helping people set up.
Yes, I've always tried to sort of run a workshop in a sort of very sort of clear way, you know. So it really works as a team. And every now and then I've had people who've sort of come in and have sort of disrupted that. But by and large, I've been hugely lucky by the sort of quality of the systems I've had over the years. I've been very lucky
When
indeed.
I look back to my couple of years in your workshop, one of the things I remember is the team and the fact that when, you know, as somebody who was there to learn, it was a brilliant learning environment because of all the other people in there. And the information was passed down from everybody. You know, it was such a great way to, when I look back, it was such a great way to learn. You know, there was different people at different stages of their career and everybody helped each other out. I mean, I didn't do much helping because I was learning, but I just remember it being a really positive learning environment. You know, I learned so much. So thank you.
I'd like to acknowledge the fact that your generosity, Richard, because I've met people, correct me on this, but I think every other Sunday or something you used to do either a Saturday or a Sunday club where
Yeah.
people would come and you would give a couple of hours or so for free to people who you couldn't take on in the workshop. They would come in on a kind of invited aspect, and you would generously give your weekend time after a full week at work. You would then help them on their journey and best you could, because you couldn't take them on. You had your assistants, you had your team. And I've met a couple of people who did that, and I don't know anybody that would have done. Your generosity and your sharing of knowledge is unprecedented, I think, across the board in all sorts of crafts. I just think I'd like to acknowledge that your ethos and your methodology around, and you know, your direction and your ethos is so extraordinarily generous, and I think that needs to be said out loud.
Yes, I think it's very important that we all acknowledge our sort of heritage that we've all learned from past masters, and unless we all pass it on, you know, it all dies. So we have a responsibility beyond the normal sort of commercial reality of doing work and having to employ assistants. You have to take it one step further than that.
Yeah. Your legacy as Richard Kindersley is vast and long. Can you acknowledge that you've got this legacy that will go on and on and on? Can you take that on board? Do you own that? Is that something you understand fully?
The thing I remember and will always remember is the huge contribution that all the people have made who've been involved in my studio. I mean, you know, my part has really just been as a conductor. I think I've been so lucky in having the quality of assistants that I've had over the years, and I will always be incredibly
no music without
thankful
the conductor, though.
No. You've got to interpret that score, haven't you? You've got to interpret.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that during this interview, I've had a sense that your enthusiasm and inquisitive nature into the world and materials has been that kernel and drive. The love of stuff and the interest in stuff is the thing that drives you, because it's not always the case. People just stick to one thing. And I love the fact that your career, your longevity and your innovation and your success has been driven initially perhaps by your just love of materials and, you know, exploration and play, I imagine, is the thing that still drives you perhaps, and that hasn't gone away. And that's such a joy.
Yes, no, absolutely.
And I don't know if you remember, I watched you have your hair cut once, Richard. You used to have your hair cut in a very nice hairdresser's in Kennington. And I remember you laying there. I just watched it. I watched you from the outside in a very creepy way. Just have your hair washed, and a lady cut your hair, and I just saw Richard Kindersley at total ease, having having a trim by a very nice woman. She had you in the window. It was like she wanted us to watch it, actually. But yes, having a down 10 minutes in between massive commissions. I'm just going to go and have a trim.
Yes.
I'm going to have a beard trim and a hair trim. Thank you.
Yes.
Very sweet moment.
Sort of done an hour. So we're probably, unless there's anything you want to add, which would be lovely, if you've got any thoughts you'd like to leave us with.
No, I think that in everybody's work there are high points and low points, and I always say to people when they've hit a low point, I say, forget it. Remember when you have a high point, because that high point will be able to give you the energy to proceed further and bridge the low point. Life is never a straight line. It's always up and down.
That's brilliant advice. It's so easy, isn't it, to dwell on the negative?
Yes.
Because the joy bits are so fleeting. We often can't just grab them and sit with them for a while.
Yeah.
That's brilliant advice. Are you still in Kennington, Richard? Have you still got your studio?
Yes,
you're still there.
Yeah.
I remember walking into that and just being, I'd never seen anything quite like it. The tall ceilings and the setup and the huge. You had some huge monolith. I think they went to Scotland. There was some enormous monolith stones in there at the time.
Yes.
I remember your generosity in walking around, and I think one of my endearing memories is your enormous library. You had your mezzanine library. And I just thought, I'm in absolute heaven. I walked in there and I thought I could live here. I could just put a bed up on the floor and just sleep here forever and just look at these books. It was a absolute inspiration. That I was like, really, there are this many books on this sort of subject and all sorts of subjects. So that was extraordinary.
Yes.
That's brilliant. How did you find that building out of curiosity? Because it's so. It wasn't purpose built for you, was it? Or was it?
No, it wasn't. It was spotted by my brother who lived nearby, and he saw it being built, and there are only 6, and the Duchy of Cornwall who were building them had this idea that you have a painter and a sculptor and a printmaker and a portrait painter, and we would all have this little group of studios around a courtyard. And lunchtime, we would open our doors and walk into the courtyard with our sandwiches and have profound discussions about art and where it's going. But of course, being English, we slammed the doors, locked them, and never spoke to each other for 20 years. But sadly now, they've all gone back to housing, because artists, or most artists, will find it very difficult to work and live in London because the costs are so extreme. I mean, just rates, insurance. It's laudable for the government to try and ban cars, etc. But if you're a working sculptor, you need a van because your materials are quite big. You can't put it on your bike or go on the bus with them.
Yeah.
So it's difficult.
Yeah, it's very rare now, isn't it, to find anybody who can work, well, actually finding any premises to work stone in any kind of city centre across the UK, I think is
And when
very,
they build
very
craft
difficult
units,
now.
they're not thinking about people who make lots of noise and dust.
No.
Yeah,
No.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, yes,
They don't want messy crafts.
No, or they don't want noisy, messy crafts.
No. So we've lost all our blacksmiths. We've lost all our inner city blacksmiths, haven't we? We've lost all metal workers. We've lost, all our carvers, etc. There are some, and derelict buildings, of course, are defunct. There is no such thing really as a derelict building anymore, is there? They're just, expensive flats now, all of these things.
Yes.
Yeah, it's hard to know where people go, actually. They have to, it's a big struggle for students, I think, finding workshop space. Often the ones that are successful go in big groups and take on a larger space and divvy it up. I think it's very difficult for students to go into an established studio environment if they're making
space
a mess.
Space is such an important part of being able to be creative and have the opportunity to make a mess and explore. Is such an important part of that journey, isn't it? So not having it is very limiting. I always think it's limiting when I always think it's funny when artists say, they don't want to be limited by anything, but actually, finance is a huge limiting factor. If your materials are expensive, if you need space to make them, if you need to travel to get to a workshop, all of those things depend upon a certain amount of income. And if you're working on your kitchen table, which, as you say, we've all done, Richard, you're limited to the scale that you can work on and also the range of materials you can bring into a domestic environment. And it's completely wrong not to acknowledge that if we want a vibrant arts and crafts scene in our culture, then we need money to enable people in an increasingly hostile market in terms of renting. We need people to be supported, or all the skills won't have the space to flourish.
And of course, the limited skills, limited finance, limited space limits your ambition. And if you have like Richard's saying, if you don't have the ambition and that drive in your early 20s to go in, I want to do this. If you don't have that, if it's tampered down by your environment, then the expertise is a lot longer coming towards you, isn't it? Because ambition makes you take risks and work, and that fear factor we're talking about comes through slightly overstepping your perimeter and slightly overstepping your skill factor, which means you've got ambition and you have to have premises and some finance behind you to do that.
Yes, that's true.
Right, Charlotte Howarth.
We've probably talked enough. I mean, it's so fascinating to hear your take on everything. The years of experience ring very clear through the youth. I think it's so fascinating, listening to your reflections. So thank you so much for agreeing to come on our podcast.
I'd like to say we've covered such a tiny amount in this limited amount of time, and perhaps you'll come back on, Richard, and we'll talk about slightly different things at another time. But to actually have you on and for you to take your time out of your morning is so generous and so lovely of you. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute delight.
Thank you, Richard.
And insight. And I'm really glad that Charlotte saved your life, Richard. On behalf of the nation, I'd like to thank Charlotte Howarth for saving your life.
And she really did.
I think I might add that to my CV. Richard,
I think it should go on your CV. Wonderful. Right. Richard Kindersley, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, Charlotte Howarth, how was that for you?
Do you mean lifesaver,
Oh
Charlotte
my
Howe?
God, Charlotte, seriously. And I was just talking to you earlier saying that I think you think you're asleep at night, but I think you're a superhero running around the country saving people from trip hazards. I think
And
you
have
have
no
no
memory
memory
of
of
them in
it
the
when you wake
morning.
up. I think there was a film where somebody repeated a poem to someone and they clicked into being an assassin. And I think somebody rings you up and says, "Incy bitsy spider crawling up your leg," whatever it is, and you click in and you run off and you save people from walking in front of cars and falling down holes. How brilliant's that? I love the fact you have
A
no
nice idea.
memory of it, Charlotte. I love it. Anyway, Richard Kindersley, what is there to say?
It was a brilliant interview. I loved the wisdom. I loved all the things he said, like the arrogance of youth. I think we can
Oh my
so
God.
recognize that. And if you are young yourself, you probably can't recognize it, but we can
Later on
guarantee
you will.
you will.
Later on. And let's
You will when
put it
you're
out there.
older.
If you are young, everyone around you is recognizing that in you. So the unstoppable arrogance of youth. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Nothing wrong with it. It's a
Yeah,
part of
yeah, yeah,
our
yeah.
development, isn't
Do you
it?
know what? To talk to somebody at the heart of their life and having such an unprecedented career, and they're still as enthusiastic and joyful about materials. You know, there's no
I loved
decline there,
that.
is there? There's no like, oh, well, I've done that, you know. It's like still
The
the curiosity, the
curiosity.
unkillable curiosity of stuff.
Yeah. And the daring, I
Yeah,
think. The
yeah.
daring. I think to take on those commissions so
Mm.
competently requires great skill and great
Mm.
bravery in
I
many
think that
ways.
we stopped the recording, didn't we? And we just had a brief chat with Richard at the end. And you mentioned there is a really extraordinary lecture by him from the Lettering Arts Trust.
It's
Letter
letter
Exchange, that's right.
exchange.
And we were trying to find the
Yeah.
recording of that, weren't we? And he
I'm just
just try and
looking
find it.
now.
Anyway, so he was saying that it was a very emotional event for him because the audience was full of ex-students and ex-assistants, and that they had come out in their droves because they value what he has to say and his generosity and their just love for him.
Well, there's Tom Perkins, Annette Sterling, Gary
Too many to mention,
Breeze,
really.
Chusa
Yeah,
Wilson.
all the
I
top
mean,
stars.
Loads and loads of people have come through Richard's workshop. Mark Brooks.
Mm.
And those are just, some of the ones I can
Mm.
name off the top of my head. But there's a lot of people have been trained and hugely influenced by Richard. I remember when I worked for him, we didn't often see him carve. And then we went down on site doing a brick carving on a school. And I was utterly gobsmacked because when Richard was we were carving these letters in brick. So they were sort of cushion cut. So they had a V cut outline of the letter, and then we curved the middle bit of the brick to make it look soft and catch the light and shade. So quite a simple technique. But when you cut brick, obviously every brick has an edge, so you can't just run up, you have to go backwards and forwards to keep the edges. So quite tricky in terms of just being careful. And Richard looked like he was going at a leisurely pace. He didn't look like he was, whacking it out and, going at his fastest. But yet the speed of which he completed the letters, I was astonished by. I couldn't keep up with him. I'm always was looking at how many letters I cut a day when I was training. But the speed and the ease of which Richard did that, I always remember it amazing. It was so skillful, and it just looked like he wasn't making any effort. But of course he was. It was just sheer knowledge and skill of material.
All of that. I always think the people who make it look the easiest, the skill it takes to make something look easy is hard won,
And that
isn't it?
knowledge of digital technology going back so far, because he's so engaged in modern technologies and how they work with our craft, and to hear that he was engaged in that process so early on, I thought that was
I'm
fascinating
quite
as
interested
well.
by that.
He's ahead of all of us.
Yeah, it's still even today he's ahead of us, isn't he?
Yeah. Head of all of us.
Yeah, humbling and just joyful. The whole thing was. Do you know what? I was listening.
Yeah.
I was when we were on the thing. I was thinking, oh my god, I love this podcast. I love doing this. Even if we don't have many, if we don't have any listeners, I'd still keep doing it because I love talking to people, and like you were saying, the voices of experience are just so joyful to hear. Oh, anyway.
Find it a much more accessible way to listen than to read in a magazine, because I can put my headphones on when I'm working and listen to talk. I can't listen to music. We've talked about that, but I can definitely listen to talk. And so I just, like it there in the background.
I hope other people have the same experience. I hope they get.
Yeah. Anyway, have we got some Christmas top tips other than our gift?
We're creeping towards Christmas. My top tip would be make sure you have a little break. You and I,
that's a really good top tip.
Both of us worked through Christmas because of projects, etc., haven't we? But over the years. But I would say, if you've got deadlines and they're looming, I do understand what people have to work through, but make sure you have a day at least to yourself and your loved ones or families, or you just lay on the sofa and watch, some sort of Bruce Willis film, whatever people, Muppets Christmas Carol. Watch some telly, have something nice to eat, and just decompress for a day. That would be my top tip.
Mine too.
So I'm going to ask you, what are you buying yourself for Christmas, Charlotte Howarth?
Well, I have already bought it, and I'd like to recommend it.
Okay. We are not sponsored by anybody. You need to know we don't get free stuff through this. So she's doing a recommendation off her own back. Go on.
Yeah. Well, so I like quite a cool workshop. I choose to have a cool workshop because I do have heating, but I don't like it too hot. But I know many people don't have the choice. And for letter carving, keeping warm, I always find overalls, however big you get them, when you go to carve the letters, that stretch that you need in your arm, they're not always big enough, or they can be, you can have that real restriction in your movements from some overalls. And so Jackson's, I've discovered, are doing a traditional artist smock. Now, I've bought one of these smocks and I absolutely love it. It's like a big sort of gown that you put on, and it covers all your clothes from the dust, but it gives you complete freedom of movement when you're carving your letters. It's got a couple of pockets. It's made of cotton. You can put it in the washing machine and you can take it off and leave the dust behind. So if you're thinking about, whether you like something to cover up or not, or an apron, I always generally like an apron, but now I've discovered the smock, the apron has clearly taken a back seat. So it's the artist smock from Jackson's. If you're brave enough to wear it, I certainly am, and there's no going back.
Yes, I've seen the smock, and it would be an adjustment for me to wear that. But I am a little bit shorter, so it probably brushed the floor. When I look at you, I think of all those images of Victorian sculptors and painters. It's like it is a traditional painting.
It is a traditional smock, but weird, although, once you get over the sort of look of it, actually, it's incredibly practical. And it's because you can put loads of layers on underneath. They're made big, and you can put loads of layers underneath to keep warm, and then you just put the smock on top, and it keeps everything, it's better than an apron because it buttons right up to the top, and you don't have to have so much dusty bust.
Yes, okay, right. What am I buying for myself, Charlotte? How would you say?
Yeah, what are you buying, Nina?
I'm going to buy myself my first real battery-operated 4.5-inch, or the smallest battery-operated angle grinder that I can find of quality, because I've burnt myself through. I've burnt a couple of cheaper ones out to try them out.
Battery ones.
So I'm going to go with one which the batteries last a bit longer. So yes, I'm going to go for a brand. I'm not going to say what brand I'm going to go for, but I'm going to go for a bit of a brand, and do that thing. I'm going to go that way.
Do you use a battery-operated grinder for most of your cutting?
Well, until I broke them, yes. The smaller ones, not the bigger ones. I always use a plug-in one for the big one, but the small. I quite like the flexibility of moving it around. You can be quite free with it, because you don't have to worry about that thing. I also find, since I've started to wear quite high magnification glasses, once I've got my mask, my glasses and my headphones on, I feel a restriction to my environment. I feel slightly unaware of what's going on. So sometimes I've forgotten where the flex is, and I've kind of tried to step and I got caught on the flex, or the flex gets caught. And that constant kind of moving the flex around, it sounds a bit odd because it doesn't take very long to do that, but actually over a period of a day it can be quite annoying. So I'm going to go that way.
I've only just got my first battery operated tools in the last couple of months. Actually, I've always avoided them because I didn't think they were suitable for the sort of work that we did. But I was on site recently and I just thought, I'm just going to have to get a battery operated grinder. And so I just got one, nothing special, not variable speed. And I was amazed at how nice it was to use. And I completely understand what you mean about the flex. There is a freedom to it. And sometimes all my power tools are on 110, so I have to get my transformer out and plug everything in. And sometimes you think, oh, I could get my grinder out. But the thought of going through the process of dragging out everything that you need to get that grinder plugged in and up and running, and then there's the battery grinder ready to go. It's like, there is a freedom to it that I think is definitely really
I've been
good.
using battery powered drills for a long time, and I wouldn't. The only plug-in drill I've got now is a kind of large Hilti, a very large Hilti hammer drill, which I still like. Actually, I still like that. I love my Hilti hammer drill. Oh no, it's Makita. Yeah, no, it's not Hilti. It's a Makita hammer drill. I absolutely love it, and it's done me proud. But for general use around the workshop and around the house, whatever, I have to.
I can't think what my hammer drill
It
might
is
be Makita.
It's exactly the same as mine. I think it's in a blue box.
Oh, is it? It is a red one, a red box one. It's a Makita. Yeah,
no,
I love
Makita's
that.
A blue.
But I've got a very old.
Yeah.
Is it? Oh, I've got a very old Bosch drill that was my stepfather's. That is probably 30 or 40 plus years old. That's still going strong. I like an electric drill, and I love a hand drill. Actually, I still use
you're a big
my
fan
hand
of a
drill
hand
a lot,
drill, aren't
and
you? You still use them, don't you?
Obviously, it's not suitable for all stones, but for softer stones, when you just put in little holes and things in the back. I mean, obviously, we do different things with the drills as well, but I think we forget how good those old-fashioned tools can be. And I use my hand drill the whole time. I'm always pulling it out to do something, right? Because I've never had a battery drill as well. Up until very recently, that's always been my choice of, the quick and easy drill for softer things has always been my hand drill, and I like that. That's our top tips. Top tips for the fitting room.
And so this is our Christmas edition, and so I'd like to wish everybody a happy break and holiday if you get one, and a very good new year. And I hope the new year brings joy, prosperity, and happiness and health to all. And hopefully we've got a couple of very special people plugged in.
We're already on our 2025 guest list.
We really are. And so that's it. So to all the carving community out there, I hope 24 has been kind and opportunistic and happy for you all. So from me at the eastern end of the world, you're at the eastern end of the world too, aren't you, really? But from us in North Norfolk, love and camaraderie.
Hear you next year.
Happy chipping. And hear you next year. Happy chipping. Bugger.